All right, folks, we are back. It's the Alex Jones Show. I am Jason Bermas. I've been sitting in all week. I'm a filmmaker. Put together Loose Change, Final Cut, and, of course, Fabled Enemies. You can get both of those as well as all of Alex Jones's titles over at Infowars.com. And we're talking bailout with Peter Dale Scott. We're also talking the Federal Reserve, and I want to remind people that the Federal Reserve is an independent organization. I mean, you can watch Alan Greenspan on PBS actually tout that, oh, we're independent of the federal government, and actually we have no oversight, and we're really above the president in many respects. And if you see how the Federal Reserve works, the board, and correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, but I believe that you vote for you're a constituent, you vote for your congressmen, your senators, and things like that. But those people are the ones who actually decide who's going to be on the board of the Federal Reserve, and they serve, I want to say, what is it, 13? Well, no, it's 13 members, and what do they serve? 8-year terms?
Yes, it's a considered way of preventing people just printing money. The idea of it is, and by the way, you do get something like this in England and in France. Because they're frightened of democracy cheapening money. Because obviously, you think I don't know what the right solution here is. I'm not as frightened. My real fear is not the particular individuals who are in the Federal Reserve. My fear is of the influence of the wealthy in this country, which works through the Fed, it works through the Treasury Department, it works very much through the CIA, and that's actually been my specialty over these years. You know, at the beginning, the CIA was sort of planned on Wall Street, and all the first directors, or practically all the first directors and deputy directors, were taken en masse from Wall Street firms, law firms, and Wall Street investment companies. And that bias in terms of preserving wealth has affected our foreign policy since the war. It wasn't totally evil at the beginning, but ever since America started having to tighten its belt, which is roughly at the end of the Vietnam War, it's been done in such a way as to protect the rich and let somebody else pay. And what we've seen from this is declining income in the third world, which, of course, leads to increased violence in the third world, and declining income, real income, not just what the numbers on a paycheck, but real income has been declining for the working class in this country and increasingly now for the middle class as well. And that's why I say, you've had this bubble, this financial bubble that has been, in a sense, extracting wealth out of the body politic, depositing it in the bank accounts of the rich, and now the bailouts are still, in a sense, trying to preserve that particular relationship, which we've got to talk about martial law and war in this program, but I really am, of course, very wound up about this influence of wealth.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I wanted to move into, martial law, the financial bailout, and more. Where does martial law fit into all this? Not only were they threatened with martial law, but we have an Obama administration that says that they're going to redistribute troops into Afghanistan. Obviously, there's tensions not only in Gaza and Israel, but Pakistan is now more and more, showing up on the media as the enemy. I mean, is martial law here at home something that we should really be worried about?
Preparations for martial law have been increasing constantly for the last 30 years. It really goes back to the troubles back in the 1960s and 1970s when there was a case, actually. I think I approved of calling out the troops in places like Detroit because the federal troops were not as racist as the local police and were more efficient in restoring order. But traditionally in this country, as I'm sure most of the audience know, you only use federal troops in an extreme emergency. We have posse comitatus acts dating back to Reconstruction after the Civil War, which forbid the use of troops in a normal way in police activities. And that's been undermined now since the early 1980s by secret planning by a committee that was set up under the Reagan administration, and it's for 20 years it kept on going, and two of the chief people in the planning, not the only ones, were Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. And they were planning for what was in effect called the suspension of the American Constitution. First of all, in an atomic attack. But what the extraordinary thing was, they took planning against an atomic attack and applied it to normal police activity, and that's what we're getting today.
We'll be back with Peter Dale Scott. Martial law, the financial bailout, and more. It's the Alex Jones Show. Infowars.com, PrisonPlanet.tv.
Hi, this is Ted Anderson. Have you ever wondered why banks, stockbrokers, investment advisors won't talk about gold for your IRA? The financial industry refuses to recognize the value of real hard assets for your retirement. The truth be told, gold and silver has outperformed paper investments like stocks, bonds, and CDs, yet no word about IRAs. Perhaps the financial institutions want to maintain control of your assets by keeping you in paper. If you'd like to take a look at gold for your retirement, call 800-686-2237. Don't get left behind by rising inflation and low return on your paper investments. Call 800-686-2237. Make sure that you secure your future. Call 800-686-2237. That's 1-800-686-2237.
All right, we're back. It's the Alex Jones Show. We're live right now streaming video over at PrisonPlanet.tv. We're talking to Peter Dale Scott, author of The War Conspiracy and many other books. I think that was actually a banned book for quite some time. He coined the term parapolitics. And we were just talking about the continuity of government program, often referred to as the shadow government. And you were talking about how it was revamped in the 80s. In the 80s under Reagan. And what I found in my research, and I have a little part of it in Fabled Enemies, is in the late 80s, early 90s, the National Programs Office took over the COG responsibilities under George H.W. Bush, the then vice president, and it just expanded their powers. It was almost the birth of the sole source contract, where they went into all these little black ops modes. Why don't you talk about that?
And then just to carry it on, at the end of the G.H.W. Bush administration, the New York Times ran an article and said that there was no more atomic, with the disappearance of the Soviet Union, they were no longer so frightened of an atomic attack, so they were winding up these programs. It was a very misleading article, because what had happened was that they had shifted the planning from an atomic focus to just any emergency. And one of the last acts of the Reagan administration was to pass an executive order that made that official, that it could be any emergency. So the planning continued under Clinton. And according to Alexander Coburn, Clinton had no real idea of the extent of this planning. He must have had some idea of it, because he signed a couple of orders himself. But the really extraordinary thing is that in the 90s under Clinton, neither Cheney nor Rumsfeld had anything to do with the government. Each of them was a CEO of a major corporation. But the planning continued, and the Army has, one of the last fruits of the Clinton administration was a new directive for the Army, which legitimized the idea that the Army would permanently have what they call a co-op, a continuity of operations program in the Army. For the first time, instead of the people who had worried about an attack from abroad would now worry from an attack at home, from violence of any form. And right after 9/11, we got a whole series of things, which I'm sure were COG plans, one of which is going to be very important in the future, and that is the creation of an Army command for North America. Just like you have a command for Southcom for South America, there's now Northcom for North America. And last September, they announced that they moved a combat brigade from Iraq to the United States, ready for combat in the United States. This is entirely unprecedented, and it's been announced that this is probably, they announced it in connection with the inauguration, and we've seen since then the troops are now in Washington, controlling Washington. But this is not an ad hoc thing. This is a permanent thing under this new order.
Absolutely. And you know what? Let's play the clip of Obama before he's elected talking about a civilian security force. And he's openly said that he's going to bring 20,000 troops into the United States for domestic operations. Let's play that clip.
Now. Yeah, they're here.
We cannot continue to rely only on our military in order to achieve the national security objectives that we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well funded.